Chapter 7. The months that followed were the longest of my existence. I don't mean that figuratively. I'd stood guard at Eden's Gate for years. I'd fought through the grinding campaign before the flood. I'd watched civilizations rise and rot. I'd held my position through all of it. But this was different. This was waiting without any indication that the waiting would end. The water just sat there, still and patient, like it was in no hurry to go anywhere. I circled the ark. Day after day, the same route, the same featureless expanse of water below, the same slowly clearing sky above. Hazel and I took shifts. The fallen had pulled back after the rain stopped, retreating to wherever they went when they weren't actively trying to destroy things. Maybe they thought their work was done. The world was drowned. What was left to fight over? But inside the ark, life continued. I could hear it through the hull. Noah and his family tended the animals, feeding, cleaning, caring for thousands of creatures in a wooden box floating on the grave of everything they'd known. I heard arguments. Of course there were arguments. 8 people in a confined space for months, with no way out and no word from God about when it would end. Ham was the loudest. I could hear his voice through the planks, sharp and frustrated, asking questions nobody could answer. How long? When does this end? What's the plan? His wife tried to calm him. It didn't always work. Shem was quieter. He worked alongside his father in near silence, keeping to the routine Noah had established. Feed the animals, check the hull, maintain the structure, and pray. Shem prayed almost as much as Noah did, though his prayers sounded different. Less like conversation, more like holding on with both hands. Japheth moved between his brothers. One day he worked with Shem's steady calm, the next he absorbed Ham's restless energy. He was the youngest, and I think the waiting was hardest on him. He had the least practice at trusting what he couldn't see. Noah kept the center. Every morning he walked the 3 decks, checking on every family, every animal, every seal and joint and beam. He prayed as he walked. He didn't complain, he didn't question. But I saw him. Late at night when his family was sleeping, sitting by the window on the upper deck, staring out at the water. His face in those moments looked like God's face had looked in the garden after the fall. Grief held in place by something stronger than grief. Resolve, maybe? Or faith so deep it had become part of him. I wanted to comfort him. Tell him the water would recede. That ground would appear, that he'd step off this boat and feel soil under his feet again. But I didn't know those things for certain. God hadn't spoken to me about what came next. God had said protect Noah. He hadn't said for how long. Then the wind came. God sent a wind over the earth. I felt it before the water did. A breath rolling across the surface of the deep, warm, and deliberate, carrying something in it that I recognized. Intent and purpose. The same kind of breath I'd felt when God breathed life into Adam's clay lungs. The water began to move. Not dramatically, not a sudden draining like pulling a plug from a basin, but slowly. The level dropping so gradually that I couldn't see it happen. I could only measure it by the marks on the ark's hull. Pitch dark lines appearing above the waterline an inch at a time. Days passed, weeks. The tops of mountains emerged like the backs of sleeping creatures breaking the surface. I saw the peaks of Ararat first, dark stone pushing through the gray water, sharp and real and solid in a world that had been nothing but liquid for months. The ark settled. A grinding sound, wood against rock. The keel found purchase on something it could rest on. The vessel groaned and tilted, then steadied. For the first time since the waters had lifted it from that clearing, the ark was still. Noah knew it immediately. I heard him move to the window, heard his breath catch, heard the silence that followed when he looked out and saw the mountain peaks rising from the water. Noah didn't shout, didn't celebrate. He just stood there, hands gripping the window frame, and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. But I knew what it was. I'd been around Noah long enough to know that every moment of significance in his life began the same way. He said thank you. More time passed. The water continued to recede so slowly that Noah could only measure the change by watching the mountain peaks grow taller. The waterline crept lower as more rock and eventually more earth appeared from beneath the surface. He opened the window and sent out a raven. I watched the bird fly, black wings against a gray sky circling wider and wider looking for land. The raven didn't come back. It found something out there, dead things floating on the surface probably, enough to sustain it. But it didn't return with any sign of dry ground. Noah waited 7 days and sent out a dove. The dove was different, smaller, less hardy, needing a place to land. I watched her fly, a pale shape against the clearing sky, and I found myself hoping in a way that felt almost painful. Such a small creature carrying such enormous weight. The question of whether the world still existed beneath all that water resting on those fragile wings. She came back. That was all, and it was everything. Noah stretched out his hand, and she landed on it, tired and empty. No branch, no leaf, no sign. Just a small bird who'd found nothing but water in every direction. Noah brought her inside and waited another 7 days. He sent her out again. I followed her this time. I couldn't help it. I left my post above the ark and flew alongside this little dove, watching her navigate the wind, her small head turning, scanning the world below for any flash of green. She found it, a hillside below the waterline, not quite exposed yet, but close enough to the surface that an olive tree had pushed its branches above the water. The leaves were new, tender, barely formed, but they were green. Green in a world that had been gray and brown and dead for over a year. The dove landed on the branch, studied it, and snapped off a sprig with her beak. I watched her fly back to the ark, this tiny bird carrying a leaf, and I thought about Abel, about his lamb carried to the altar, about Noah carrying faith through decades of mockery, about small things bearing the weight of enormous truths. She arrived at the window, and Noah saw what she carried. He took the olive leaf from her beak, and I saw his hands tremble. He held it up to the light, turning it, studying it. A single leaf, proof that the earth was still alive, that God hadn't destroyed everything, that somewhere beneath the receding water, the ground was ready to grow again. Noah wept. I'd seen him endure the mocking, the decades of labor, the sound of people beating on the sealed door as the water rose. Through all of it, his face had been stone, set and certain, a man doing what God had told him to do regardless of the cost. But a leaf broke him open. He stood at that window with tears running down his face, holding an olive sprig, and Noah's wife came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his chest. They stood there together, 2 old people on a boat, crying over a leaf. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out a final time. She didn't come back. She'd found her home. I tried not to feel it as a loss. God spoke to Noah. I heard it this time. Not fragments, not phrases drifting toward me like smoke. The full voice, clear and warm and carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Come out of the ark, God said. You and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every living creature that is with you, birds and animals and everything that moves along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number. Come out, 2 words that contained a world. Noah opened the door. The same door God had sealed months before. It swung open, and light flooded the interior, and I heard the animals respond before the humans did. A sound that rose from all 3 decks at once, calls and cries and songs. Thousands of creatures recognizing something their bodies understood before their minds could process it. Fresh air, sunlight, earth. The animals came out the way they'd gone in. Orderly and purposeful. Pairs moving down the ramp Noah's sons had built, stepping onto the rocky ground of Ararat with a sureness that said they knew exactly where they were going. Birds launched from the upper deck in clouds, scattering across a sky that was bluer than any I'd seen since before the flood. Insects poured out in rivers of tiny wings. Larger creatures, cattle and horses and deer and bears, walked steadily down and out and away, spreading across the mountainside, filling the silence with the sound of living things. Noah came out last. He stood at the top of the ramp, his wife beside him, his sons and their wives behind them. 8 people. The entirety of humanity, standing on a mountainside above a world that was still more water than land. Noah looked out at the empty earth, at the mud and the rock and the scattered pools that still covered the valleys, at the sky clear now, impossibly clear. The kind of sky that comes after a long storm when the air itself has been washed. Then he built an altar. Not a shelter, not a fire for warmth. Not a garden or a home or any of the practical things that 8 people standing on the edge of a drowned world might have needed. An altar. He took some of the clean animals, the ones God had told him to bring in 7s, and he sacrificed them. The blood ran over the stones, and the fire rose, and the smoke climbed into that washed clean sky, and Noah stood before the altar with his head bowed and his hands lifted. His first act on the new earth was worship. I thought about Abel. The first sacrifice I'd witnessed, the lamb's blood on the stones, and God looking on it with favor. I thought about the blood that had followed. Abel's own blood crying from the ground. The violence that had spread until it filled the earth. The blood that had driven God to wash the whole world clean. And here was Noah, standing in the mud of a new beginning, offering blood again. Different blood, grateful blood. Blood that said, "You saved us." Blood that said, "I remember who you are." Then I felt God respond. His presence settled over that mountaintop the way it had settled over the garden in those first days. Warm, intimate, not distant or formal or hidden behind commands relayed through archangels. God himself there, with this one family on the edge of everything. Never again, God said. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. I heard every word, and one phrase caught in my mind and wouldn't let go. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Even though God knew, he knew that the flood hadn't fixed the problem. That the corruption, the violence, the sin that had spread from one couple in a garden to an entire civilization. That seed was still alive. It had floated through the deluge in the hearts of the 8 people on that boat. It would grow again, spread again, corrupt again, and he promised never to do this again. I looked at Hazel. He was staring at the altar, at the smoke still rising, and his expression was something I hadn't seen on him before. Not frustration, not the rigid certainty that usually defined him. Something softer, something almost like bewilderment. "Did you hear that?" Hazel asked. "I heard it," I said. Even though, Hazel said slowly, repeating it like a phrase in a language he was still learning. "He knows it didn't work. He knows they'll corrupt themselves again, and he's promising not to judge them this way anymore. Yes, I said. Then what was the point? Hazel asked. His voice was quiet, the question genuine. Not bitter, just lost. All of it. The decades of building, the door, the flood, our friends. He paused. Sariel, if it didn't fix anything, if the evil is still in them, then why did we fight to protect this ark? I didn't have an answer. I stood there on that mountainside, smelling the smoke from Noah's altar, and I didn't have a single thing to say that would make any of it make sense. But then God did something I'd never seen before. The sky changed. Not the way it changed when the firmament opened and the flood poured through. Not darkness or storm or judgment. Light and color, something new entering the world for the first time. I saw it form. An arc of light bending across the sky so vivid it looked painted. Colors I'd seen individually in flowers and birds and sunsets, but never together like this. Never arranged in this precise order. Never suspended between earth and heaven like a bridge. The rainbow hung there, stretching from horizon to horizon, shimmering against the blue. Noah looked up. His wife looked up. His sons and their wives stood together and looked up. And for a moment all 8 of them were still. Faces turned toward something none of them had ever seen. This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, God said. A covenant for all generations to come. I'd never heard him make a promise like this before. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth, and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. A sign, not for God. He didn't need a reminder. For them. For us. For every creature that would ever look up after a storm and see those colors bending across the sky and wonder what they meant. I stared at it. This new thing. This impossible beauty hanging in the atmosphere of a world that was still mostly mud and ruin. A promise made visible. A covenant you could see with your eyes. Hazel stood beside me, and for once he had nothing to say. We watched the rainbow fade as the sun moved. Watched the colors thin and dissolve. Watched the sky return to its ordinary blue. But I didn't forget. I don't think anyone who saw it could forget. The family came down from Ararat over the weeks that followed. Noah's sons scouted the lower elevations. They found where the water had drained, where the soil was ready, where they could begin again. The world was empty and raw, like the first days of creation before God had filled it. Mud everywhere, the bones of the old world jutting from the ground, trees stripped bare, stone exposed. But life was already returning. The grass was first, the way it had been the first time. Then shrubs, then saplings pushing up through the silt. The animals Noah had released were spreading, finding territories, making dens and nests and burrows, filling the earth the way God had said. I watched the family settle into a valley below the mountains. Noah planted a vineyard. His sons built shelters, then homes, then the beginnings of a village. Shem and his wife worked the soil together with a quiet industry that reminded me of Adam in the garden. Ham ranged farther, exploring, restless, already looking beyond the valley for more. Japheth stayed close, steady now in a way he hadn't been on the ark. It looked like a beginning. And maybe it was. Maybe the flood had accomplished more than I could measure. Not the elimination of sin, that much was clear. But maybe it was a demonstration. That God could end everything and chose not to. That his commitment to these fragile, broken, beloved creatures went deeper than their failures. Or maybe I was trying to make sense of what didn't have a neat explanation. Maybe the flood was exactly what it looked like. Grief enacted, judgment executed. mercy extended, and a promise hung in the sky. All of those things at once. The way God's actions always seem to be more than one thing at once. I stood on that mountainside as the valley below filled with the sounds of hammering, laughter, and the bleating of new lambs. I thought about what came next. The evil was still in them. God had said so. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Those words stayed with me. The flood had washed the earth clean, but it hadn't washed the human heart. That corruption was still there, dormant maybe, quiet for now, but alive. It would surface again. I knew that the way I knew the fallen would return. The way I knew that the war wasn't over just because the battlefield had changed. But I kept coming back to the rainbow. That impossible, beautiful, unnecessary sign. God could have made his promise in words alone. He'd spoken worlds into existence with words. But he gave them a thing they could see. Color that would appear in the sky after storms. After darkness. After the worst of it had passed. A reminder that he hadn't forgotten. That he wouldn't forget. Do you think it worked? Hazel asked me one evening. We were watching the sun set over Noah's Valley. The sky streaked with orange and purple. The first thin columns of smoke rising from the settlement below. The flood? I said. Any of it? Hazel said. He gestured at the valley, at the settlement, at the thin thread of human life starting over in the mud. The garden. The exile. The mark on Cain. The flood. The rainbow. Does any of it work? I thought about it for a long time. I think he's doing what I can't see yet, I said finally. I think every piece of it matters, even the pieces that look like they failed. The flood didn't fix the human heart, but maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe it was supposed to show them the cost of what they'd become. And the rainbow, Hazel asked. The rainbow shows them he's not done, I said. That after the worst judgment he's willing to bring, there's still a promise. Still a future. Hazel was quiet. The sun sank lower. The first stars appeared. The same ones I'd watched God speak into existence. The same ones that had shone over Eden and over the flood and would shine over whatever came next. You're guessing, Hazel said, and there was no accusation in it. I know, I said, and meant it without shame. And you're still trusting, Hazel said. I looked at the sky, where the stars were multiplying in the darkness. Somewhere below us, Noah was sitting outside his shelter. His face turned upward, doing the same thing I was doing. Looking for something he couldn't name, believing it was there anyway. I don't know what else to do, I said. And for once, Hazel had nothing to argue.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.